Canada. Have any of you been watching the news lately and thought to yourself, what the hell is going on? You can't change the channel without hearing about more job losses, swine flu, the recession, war in Afghanistan, and another election already? What could all of this mean? Well, let's start off with money. Where does it even come from?
Where do I think it comes from? Like it's made? The government.
Money comes from paper.
I believe it comes from trees.
Yeah,
In the long run, I think it comes from trees. No, I believe money. I'm not 100% sure.
I'm not certain.
That's a trick question. Why?
Well, it's actually an interesting question. First of all, money is prior to money. It's going to sound like a long answer, but I'm not quite sure I know the nature of your question. But let me see how I can handle it. Thank you. Prior to money, essentially, trade.
It's actually simple. Over 95% of our money is created by private banks. That means there's less than 5% of government-created money. Let's look at the differences between creating the money ourselves and borrowing it from private banks. Creating the money ourselves pretty much just costs the labor to print it and the hard work to back it up, while borrowing money from private banks can cost up to 10 times or more than the principal before it's paid. Don't believe me?
I think that the problem isn't necessarily, in my opinion, that we issued that debt through a competitive bond process. The issue is that the level of spending that we engaged in was not appropriate, and we got into a situation where we spent too much.
This is Canada's federal debt. From 1867 to 1992, we owed $423 billion. However, 91% of this debt is the result of interest on interest. And only 8% of the money was actually used on real things, like goods and services. But now we have to pay back over 10 times what we needed, simply because we borrowed from private banks instead of ourselves. So where do these private banks get their billions of dollars from that they lend out? Nowhere! They just write down a number on a piece of paper and lend it out as if it was money to families trying to put a roof over their heads, students trying to get an education, or governments looking to improve the country. Banks then get paid multiple times back with your hard work. Every time they issue a loan, they are creating brand new money. It never existed before you walked into the bank.
So pretty much like you say, I go into a bank, I say, well, can I have like $10,000 to pay for my college? They say, sure, here, let me just go run this off the machine, and then you can pay us back with your hard-earned money.
Right. That's exactly it.
That's pretty crazy.
They just get you to believe that they're lending you what's inside their vaults. But it couldn't be further from the truth.
For instance, banks. Yeah, your banks have the amount of money that they have in reserve. The answer is no.
There's about $50 billion of real cash in Canada. All the private banks combined only have $4 billion in their vaults, or what they call reserves. And yet they've lent out $1.5 trillion, which they then charge interest on.
I think that the amount of money that's held in reserve in Canada, you're right, is pretty low. One of the reasons it's so low is because our banking system is as stable as it is.
Okay. So what would happen if we simply wanted our money back?
We would have a credit crisis, and the system would not be sustainable. So we'd have to reorganize and restructure, which is what happened actually in the Depression. I don't see that happening again.
Yeah.
But theoretically, that's what would happen.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a stable system. So isn't it a little bit fraudulent though if I were to walk into a bank and they give me a receipt I can redeem at any time, but it's only noticed that it would be called fraud if everyone came to the bank and requested their money?
Oh, I'm going to answer your question, but then I want to go back to mine.
Okay.
Because it really is, this is the huge change of the last 5 years. It's not fraudulent. It's not fraudulent. Because everybody understands it, but it is.
No one really understands.
Well, okay. I mean, those who know about it, knew about it, so it was not fraudulent.
I've talked to the teachers and MPs, even MPPs, and they had no idea that that there was only $4 billion in the vaults, but over $1 trillion was lent out.
No, let me go back. Well, the fact that they didn't know it, they should have.
But really, no one does.
Well, then quickly.
Should that be involved a little bit more before we start using money? That we should be told where it is, where it comes from?
Well, no.
Okay, so it's one thing to lend out money you just don't have. But how can you charge interest on nothing? And not just any kind of interest.
Compounded interest.
Here's a fun way to explain the difference between regular interest and compounded interest. Imagine lending someone $1 at the time Christ was born, at let's say 6% interest. Ready? Go!
To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast.
Jesus Christ is right. This is especially scary when you consider that all credit cards, loans, and mortgages are all to be paid back with compounded interest. By the way, if you translate the word mortgage to its original language, French, it literally means death pledge, because people will often work their whole lives to pay off their home by the time the banks have made all their money. Interestingly enough, the French Canadians use a different word for mortgage called hypothèque, probably because no one in their right mind would sign up for something called a death pledge. Could you imagine? So coming back to our analogy on compounded interest, you can probably see why Jesus threw the bankers out of the temple in the New Testament. And look what ended up happening to him. It's interesting how the operation of banks in Canada are all textbook examples of fraud, counterfeit, and theft.